We are going to send this out to the other 40 people who actually signed up and you guys. So David, glad to have you with us. David's an author. I can let you kind of introduce yourself. I mean, you kind of do a lot of different things, but my favorite thing is the fact that you are the son of Norwegian immigrants. And I did find this out. So I did know that, and I did a little research because I did find this. There's a Norwegian saying, "Der helt Texas," which means that's completely Texas, which
Yes.
means that's completely insane. And I don't know why that made me so happy. It just made me very happy that Norway equates insanity with Texas. If anybody here's from Texas, you probably understand it, but yes, that made me very happy.
That's
So
their version.
Don't a
Yeah.
lot of us associate Texas with insanity? We
yes,
can say that because Terry Ishii isn't on here. So
yes, he's supposed to
Yes,
be, but yeah, he's not. But my favorite thing is it's Norwegian. That's a Norwegian phrase. So,
it is.
all right, cool. Well, David, you want to like kind of introduce yourself, and I'll put a little bit of some stuff here in the chat for everybody.
Yeah, I would, that phrase in Norwegian is like our version of SMH, just shaking my head like that is crazy. And they go, that's just so Texas. And I think that's because I had to fact check it with my 25-year-old nephew and go, what's the deal? And he goes, oh no, we say that. Anyway,
Yes.
I was like Alan was saying, I grew up kind of with this heavy Scandinavian influence, but I grew up in San Francisco, uh, and I grew up feeling somewhat of like a minority, even though I was the white kid in the public schools. I was not the prevailing economic or ethnic or religious class, which teaches you to make a lower level of assumption about what people believe and how they like do family life and how they spend money. And so it was a really formative place. But I grew up in a small church in the heart of the city that was first and second generation immigrants, very blue collar sensibilities. But what was unique is that my aunties and uncles on my mom's side knew my aunts and uncles on my dad's side. And this was in San Francisco, which was a really formative environment. In fact, it taught me that church was like an extended family of faith. And that kind of set the bar for me in terms of what I was trying to contribute, but what I was looking for when I was working in churches. Now, I worked for 27 years as a pastor in several large churches, but then I planted a missional community and led that for about 7 years in Austin. And so about 3 years ago, I still love the Bride of Christ. I still feel very called to pastoral ministry within the church, but I wanted to kind of take a different chair. And that chair is I went back and I just finished a 3-year doctoral program. And then I also have been doing some writing with Nav Press. And then I get to come alongside church leaders and pastors. Some of them are emerging, some are just seasoned and been in the trenches for years. And so, and this new book, Homegrown Disciples, has had some really fun traction with a lot of families who are just trying to figure out how do we integrate faith into the whole of life so that faith isn't just institutional, programmatic, Sunday go to church, but how does this become embodied into a way of life? And that's really, I really tried to write a book that wasn't, it was more show, don't tell. So I would say it this way. Parenting is like a workout. And I run. I don't love running, but when you think about your daily grind of a workout and you know what's on the menu for today and you go, I got to get to it. Or when you ate yesterday, and that typically is my greatest motivation. But if you think about parenting like a workout, we know that it's good. We don't necessarily always feel like it. We don't we don't always get to see the immediate results, and it often reveals something about us that we wish were different. Like if you finish a good workout, you kind of go, man, I, I I wish I was stronger. I wish I was more lean. I wish I was in better shape. And man, parenting has this way of revealing all the, gosh, I wish I was more patient. I wish I was wiser. I wish I was more gracious. And it sort of outs us in all of our insecurities and inadequacies. And that's actually a really good place to start from when we talk about relational disciple making. And so I would say that the state of parenting is living with full hearts and limited bandwidth. It's great until it's not. And most parents, including grandparents, get by without getting better. In fact, I talked with a lot of pastors. They're just trying to get by week in and week out. And there's not really a mechanism for renewal. We take breaks, but that's not always renewal. And so kudos to all of you who have taken a little bit of time in the middle of your week. Some are still putting kids to bed and still finishing up dinner, but for carving out a time on a Wednesday night in hopes of maybe just getting a little bit better. But I also want to try and interrupt the narrative and trying to uncover ways that I believe God is parenting, discipling you while you're raising them. So we need to reframe discipleship as not a one-way street where, like if you've ever signed up to teach second grade Sunday school, that's a one-way street. Like they're getting the best of you. But what happens when you realize, oh, I get to be on the receiving end and Christ is being formed in me as I invest my life? So there's a quote that I open up with in the book, and it's simply, it's sort of the parents' equivalent of the addict's prayer, where we just come and we say, sometimes our kids are make us look like we're way better parents than we really are, and sometimes our kids make us feel like we're way worse parents than we really are, and somewhere in the middle is the truth. And so, what I tried to write and what I'm trying to host even now is just for us to find that fertile middle ground of truth, because I feel like that's where we're going to find what God's doing in the midst of it. And so, because I was a pastor when I was raising my kids, who are now 23 and 25, I was so worried about raising kids with an institutional faith. I wanted them to have a relational faith. I wanted them to know Christ. I wanted to be Christ to them. I was also uncertain about what my daughter's earliest memory would be, and I knew at some point, after having been a youth pastor, that my words would fall flat. And so I felt like I got a distinct impression where God said, "You've got it half right. I want you to be Christ to her, but I want to reveal myself through her. So take notes." And so for 18 years, I was just, or excuse me, 13 years, I was just recording these impressions about how Christ was incarnating himself through her and teaching me about his love. And so I tried to just make this a chance to say, this is a chance not to get by, but to get better. And it's always harder to see what God's doing presently than it is looking over our shoulder and maybe seeing what God's been doing all along. But I would say the thing that our kids never get until they become parents, the thing that we can't not feel is that when they fall, we follow. Am I right? Like they don't understand that their choices affect us deeply. Their joy is our joy. And I'm asking each of you, where do you think we get that from? Except the image we bear. God invites us into this way to feel his sacrificial love. So when we maybe shake our fist and say, where was God when this happened? I'm saying he's right there. He's celebrating, he's rejoicing, he's grieving, he's feeling all the feels like every parent feels. And that's a really comforting thought to go, oh, God's in the hard and the good. The other thing that I want to say before I just have basically two things I want to illustrate is I think it's very natural for every Christian to think they go through seasons where they're stuck. And I like to reframe what feels stuck because, like any relationship, we go through growing pains. Every living organism goes through growing pains. So rather than feeling stuck, you might, and this is really specific to parents too, I would like to just suggest to you that there's nothing wrong. It's nothing broke. It's not that you're not good enough. It's that actually you might be going through a growing season in the same way that when I was a kid, I had a kind of appetite that has dramatically changed today. There's things that I craved and loved that now I'm sort of repulsed by and don't want to spend the calories on. But my appetite has changed. And if you're feeling like in this place in your spiritual life, things that once fed you don't resonate quite as deeply, that's not a bad thing. That's an intimacy thing, and God's inviting you to more and different. I say that because when we get into the throes of parenting and it feels relentless, there becomes this opportunity to somehow be seduced or maybe tempted to believe that somehow there's something wrong. We should be further along. And I would say, I think you're right where God would have you for this place and this time. And that's a good thing. So if we could just spend maybe the next 10 minutes just talking about this, and then I'd love to open it up for discussion. I want to bring clarity primarily on two things. Number one, clarity on what we call spiritual leadership. And number two, clarity on what we would call disciple making. And when we talk about spiritual leadership, especially when it comes to the family, I think there's been a lot of um, misunderstanding around the nature of leadership and headship. But when it comes to parenting in particular, I would like to say that spiritual leadership is more of a chain of care than it is a chain of command. If you just sit with that for a second, a lot of times we interpret leadership, particularly positional leadership, and it means that we're supposed to be stronger, we're supposed to be smarter, we're supposed to be better than we are or than the people we're leading. But here's the problem with hierarchical leadership, like a chain of command. Hierarchical leadership requires obedience. Relational leadership cultivates desire, which we find in what I would call a chain of care. So the goal of any hierarchy, and you could apply this to military, you could apply this to law enforcement, you could apply this to government. The goal of any hierarchy is to project strength and minimize weakness and mistakes, which, oh, by the way, is also makes the thing that makes hierarchy prone to hypocrisy and blame. I mean, doesn't that sound like our cultural narrative? And so what I like to encourage people do is, as parents to do, is make vulnerability your strength. But please don't try and make strength your strength. Don't make flawless your goal. Like eliminate that from even the thought. A chain of care approach should just liberate us from something performative. Because what we're really doing, especially with our kids, is we're seeding desire when we are able to model confession. We're seeding eternity when we're able to go, you know what? This was on me. And so I was like, make confession your strength. I shared a story in a couple of podcasts, but I was at a small group with these men. And this guy at the end, there's like 12 dads. And he goes, guys, I need you to pray for me. I've got four boys under the age of 10 years old. And I need God to make me more patient. And I thought, no, I didn't know him well enough, but I don't think it was an issue of patience. I would say, don't pray for more patience, pray to be more vulnerable. Like, own your stuff. Tell your boys, guys, I want to confess desire. This is who I want to be because this is who I think God is to be. I didn't think his issue was a patience one. I think it was a grace one. We don't have to have this treadmill of performative Christianity to always be getting it right when we have the forgiveness of the Father and we're seeding, incarnating the life of Jesus in them. That's way more impactful than getting it right. So I hope that encouraged you. I always laugh when people say, well, I'm not perfect. And I'm like, okay, just so you know, no one thinks you are. So when we're with God in prayer, or when we're with our kids or our spouse, we never need to go, well, I'm not perfect because no one's accusing us of that. So find liberty in that and go, let's just own our own stuff, take responsibility, and make that part of how we express our strength and character and faith in who God is. So I hope that reframes leadership a little bit more. And There were times, especially as I journaled through, and Homegrown Disciples has a lot of journal entries. Some are, I tell you that I'm writing, some are just included in the narrative of it. But it's me being taught by my kids about the stuff God is convicting me of. The second piece, and this is what I want to clarify for any earnest Christian, is to clarify what disciple making is. I think we have a lot of people coming out of the church, and this is the primary mission of the church. But here's the thing, there's three pieces, and all are equally valuable. There, if we make the primary or the primary emphasis of discipleship to be knowledge, we need to impart the right instruction and the right knowledge. What typically ends up happening is that your average earnest Christian simply feels like they don't ever know enough. Well, I didn't go to seminary, and there's always someone further along. Doesn't matter. The second thing is when we make spiritual practice, disciplines, and behavior a high point of emphasis, and but we need both those things, but it typically reproduces in someone's life the sense that inadequacy, I should be further along. My prayer life is weak, or I should have more faith because I have seen God answer prayer, or I never fast, or I just don't even have a time alone with God. I have no personal devotions. And I'm like, I'm not saying any of that is wrong, but we do need good knowledge. That's what we call orthodoxy. We do need good practice. That's what we call orthopraxy. Here's the missing link that I think parents are most equipped, if not best equipped to do, and that's orthopathy, the shaping of right desire. Because the science, the neuroscience behind identity formation, character formation, and the shaping of desire is through imitation. So, what do parents have? Proximity and influence. You really don't need too much more with that. And so I'm sitting here, and one of my big soapboxes is rather than feeling like you need to organize family devotions at the dinner table, what if you looked at four windows that happen each and every day and you just invite God, a growing awareness of God's presence? So the four windows come out of Deuteronomy 6. Morning time, drive time, meal time, and bedtime. And I think those are four ordinary, relational, inevitable, redemptive windows that parents have each and every day to just point to the kingdom and how God is present in those moments. And each chapter that I wrote has ongoing conversations, even some DIY stuff that parents can have. But parents are in this really unique role. Now, without going too far into it, I think up until the time you get to 12 years old, there's a chemical thing that happens in hormones and changes, but you're really the most influential show in town as parents. Now, once they get into teen years, then we've got some competition because identity is formed by groups. What do my people think? Ultimately, what we're trying to do is shape Jesus to be part of that identity framework. Jesus as someone who I can learn from. But that all starts with just shaping desires. So again, rather than starting this from this place of I need to make sure I convince or persuade my kids, I need to give them truth. I need to teach them right practices. This is what a good Christian does. I'm like, actually, there's a way we can embody this. And the way we teach desire is explaining the why and showing them what beliefs look like. I I had this episode when I was in fifth grade, and I had a sense of justice even back then. And my mom likes to remind me of it, but I had a very black and white sensibility. And I remember my fifth grade teacher misreading and accusing one of my dear friends of doing something that he wasn't guilty of. And I called her out. No, you got it wrong. This is what happened. And she took exception and sent me to the principal's office. And I couldn't, and it wasn't about being right and wrong. It was I disrespected her and I needed to apologize. Well, I sat there all day because I wasn't wrong. And I remember being in the equipment closet because there he's like, don't sit in my office. I'm sitting there right in outside his and they finally got my mom on the phone. It had gone through recess, it had gone through lunch, and my mom's saying to me, David, we are Christians, and this is what we do. We forgive people because we've been forgiven. I mean, she just wanted me to get my butt back in class. But there was this sense like, no, I'm right and she's wrong. She goes, it doesn't matter. And she was instilling this, no, this is the heart of the Father. And I thought, wow, she was teaching me about what Christian identity was like. It wasn't, I mean, we should all do a study on the unfairness of grace. Grace, we have to throw out the scorecard when it comes to the grace of God. So, what I did is I tried to highlight four windows that can happen within parenting leadership each and every day that we're learning and attuning our senses to what God's doing in these moments. So, mealtime is a sacred kind of standing appointment, drive time as kind of this metaphor for faith as a journey where we just get to think out loud. I used to like that morning times, like when we were making toast and finishing up homework and packing lunches, was this what I called a sacred commissioning, reminding them of who and whose they are. But then nighttime was like a sacred liturgy. The other thing that I tried to do is give parents fresh language. And I talk about seven rhythms, not spiritual practices per se, but they explain the why of what we believe. And they allow us to understand the heart of the Father. So I talk about generosity and hospitality. I talk about compassion as simply learning to see others' needs as different than our own. Talk about the role of community, finding our contribution, but also discovering our potential. I look at generosity as we don't give to save anyone necessarily. We give to save ourselves from believing somehow we deserve God's provision. I just wanted a way to instill in our kids an embodied faith. So each chapter, if you will, is a rhythm, and each rhythm, I just go through these four windows each day. And what I tried to create is a way that you can make home become a laboratory, because a laboratory was all about experimenting. If you took art classes, it's like a studio. It's formative, but you don't have to get it right the first time. And that's what home can be like. Now, the last thing I'll just say about it, and then I'd like to have some discussion, if you will, is this is what makes parents so unique. I think it's important to be a part of a church or an intentional faith community, but churches and particularly programs are good at teaching largely the hard skills of Jesus. I think parents and relationships are best at teaching the soft skills. Have you ever heard the phrase, some things are caught, not taught? That's a relational phrase. So if you go to college, it's going to teach you the hard skills of how to do business. It's going to teach you, the hard skills of learning medicine and anatomy. Uh, it's going to teach you how to do the coding, all the things, the hard skill. But it's not going to teach you how to close the deal. It's not going to teach you bedside manner until you shadow someone else. And so what I'm encouraging parents is to say, what if your experience in Christ is the syllabus and your daily life, particularly these four windows, become your curriculum? And so rather than teaching these, wonderful nuggets of knowledge, you're just speaking from your experience in Christ and calling their attention to the reality of God's presence. I have more I could say, but I'd rather just stop there and see if we can't just open it up a little bit and have some questions. Alan, let's just start with you. What
Yeah.
what kind of triggers or ideas or things you want me to come back to?
Yeah. David, what I'd love to do is there a way, I mean, go by the book. That's the biggest thing. But is there a way for you to take one of those rhythms and kind of show us those four windows just as kind of an example to kind of like give some handles to it? So like if it's generosity or hospitality, and say, here's kind of like how you would attune in those four windows.
So I'll give you a couple of examples of a couple of different ones.
Yeah.
Because I want to be very pragmatic about this, but like when we think about apprenticing, I use tradesman's language because that was native to me. But tradesman, an apprentice is the idea that you don't learn in a classroom, you learn in the shadow of, not at the feet of, which is kind of how we've created the church. Most Christians feel like they're equipped to bring someone to a service, an event, or a program and turn it over to the religious professionals. That's not apprenticeship in the way of Jesus. So, first thing we need to say, I always, regardless of whatever stage in my life, and I want to have people further along. So, apprenticing is having someone further along, someone who's walked with Jesus longer, parented longer, been married longer, been in business longer, invested longer, all the things. But I also don't want to wait because there's no concept of arrival. I want to be bringing people along in intentional ways. So, with our kids, with apprenticing, I used to say to them, kids, a youth group is not church. Youth group is a life stage, and I want you to enjoy that life stage. But I want you to actually have rapport and relationship with people that are older than you. And I want you to think about how you might steward your influence with the kids in the family groups and the younger ones. So that was always a two-way street. Um, but like, I'll give you one example that we did, and I think I include this in the book. I did a series around the animated gospel according to Pixar. So I just pulled these. We were all watching these films and just think they're. But if you remember the movie Up, where Russell, this little Boy Scout boy, is kind of abandoned by his parents, and this old curmudgeon man, but he gets to the end and he creates. He's trying to earn his badges. And so at the end, I had invited parents to, we collected all these bottle caps. We took ribbon and a glue gun and we made ribbons. And he bestowed on him the Ellie badge, the highest honor, where, and this is what I think apprenticing is, we're learning to speak into someone's life developmentally. And in the movie, it's you help me see with a new perspective. And I wonder if parents, as spiritual leaders, could start to speak, this is how God is teaching me through you. And we're awarding, we have family movie night, but then at the end, we're speaking at their life and we're making badges and we're giving them an honor. Like, this is how God is using you to shape my heart. I think that's profound. Um, we have to think of leadership as 2 degrees. I'm not calling you for to be someone different. I'm just trying to shape something 2 degrees because 2 degrees over 20 years will look radically different. And we're speaking to potential. We're speaking to God's activity in them that they might not even see themselves. That would be one example. I'll give you one more. In the area of generosity, we were well cared for. We were well provided for, and we would do specific intentional initiatives that would help resensitize our hearts to other people's needs. So I remember we took like a week to just eat something on, I gave them some statistics like, 40% of the world lives on less than $2 a day. And what if we just took dinners and just said $2 a person? So a family of four, we were eating on $8 meals. We took them grocery shopping and we had to be selective. You have to be creative. It's like we pasta, rice and beans, all the things that, but well, maybe we can afford sauce, but not sausage. And each night we wanted to walk and stand in solidarity with those people whose needs were different than, and then to notice how cared for we were, how much we had. I don't want to sit there and tell my kids, you know how blessed you are? You know how fortunate we are? Because they're like, yeah, Dad, we've heard you say that. Well, let's just eat like 40% of the world eats on rice and beans for a week. That's not roughing it. It's unfortunate, but it's not the worst thing. So we just tried to have some real, like, tangible things experientially to kind of illustrate what we're talking about, the heart of the Father.
That's good. Thanks. Yeah, that's really good. I did have one other question. You kind of rocked me with this one. Is the make confession your strength.
Yeah.
That one there, that was very, so it brought back a scene in my head where with my oldest, so I have three daughters. My oldest, she's now 20, but she was like 6 or 7. And I remember I did a parent goof. I don't even remember what it was, but I did something stupid. And I remember going to her in her room and saying, "Hey, kiddo, I'm really sorry. Nobody gave me a playbook. I don't know what I'm doing." And I kind of confessed to her, and she literally did one of these, like, you don't know what you're doing. And it was almost like
Who gave you the
too
keys to
much,
the car? Yeah.
pretty much, yeah, like I am not safe if this idiot is in charge was kind of the look, right?
Yeah.
And it was almost like I didn't have language for it. I think that's good and making confession your strength, like being vulnerable. But I think it's how to do that and do that well. You know what I mean? Like the appropriate level. So I don't know if you could speak to that one. You kind of like talked about it, but if you could speak to that just a little bit more, because that was really intriguing to me.
I tried to make like I had several family phrases that we just could come back to because I think words build culture, for better or for worse. So we tried to be very intentional. One of our family mantras was this phrase like save your best for family. Now think about the psychology of that. We go through our day, we meet with clients, we meet with parishioners, we meet with the bank teller, we get a waitress, and everyone gets a more charming version of us than our family. Our family comes home and they become the sort of proverbial cat that we kick because we're stressed or we had a long day and we haven't left it behind. So our idea was let's save our best for family because if it starts here, everyone else benefits. But we often take out, because we feel the most safe, we often take out our frustration, our stress on our family. And it's sort of a sinister compliment. I feel safe with you, so I'm going to give you my leftovers. I remember one day I came home and my son was always, I mean, he was an easy kid to raise. So gosh, I feel so fortunate and it's embarrassing, but kind of like you. I came home, it was time for dinner. He didn't listen the first time. I snapped, I overreacted, and he jumped to it but it wasn't. So I came back to him after dinner and I just said, "Bear, I did not save my best for family." And he goes, "Dad, um, it's okay. I didn't listen the first time." And I go, "Thank you, son, but you can't let me off that easy. I had these things happen today and I hadn't left them behind emotionally. I thought I had. I'd left them at the office, but they're still, I need you to forgive me." Now, the reason I say forgiveness is because we've all been on the receiving end of an insincere apology. "Well, I'm sorry you took it that way." Well, but you're not sorry you did it. "No, son, I need you to forgive me because now I'm inviting consent." I don't want him to grow up holding that against me. I don't want him to grow up storing that rejection. "Dad, I forgive you." I was like, man, I'll try save my best for family. So that was one of the ways, like you, we all have these parenting fails. And then I just wanted to let the Lord redeem it, even though it feels like, well, I've just got to humble myself. I've got to own this. But that's that's Christ, more than my own carnal nature to want to cover it up or, well, he knows I love him, or something like that. And it's that it's hard to do it with your spouse, not just to your kids. It's go, "Honey, that's on me. My tone was wrong," or that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Well, I'd love to. I don't want to take all the questions, so I'd love to open it up. If anybody else has any questions for Dave, kind of wrestling with these ideas.
Hey, David, I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of like the research you did for the book, and kind of where Christian families are in culture today, where the church is not as winsome to new generations. And
Yeah.
so, um, I mean, half my kids didn't want to go to church at all.
Mm.
They didn't want any of the programs. They didn't enjoy youth group, any of those kinds of things. You know, and they are in that deconstructed from institutional church
Yeah.
um, crowd now. They're all 20s and oldest is 30. Um, but it seems like there is a shift in that direction. And so the discipleship of kids, um, or the hard, like you were saying, maybe the hard education used to happen in the youth group. Well,
Yeah.
if they're not drawn to the youth group anymore, and you don't want to make church this, well, you have to go. You want to make it more an example of rhythm. How do you have any thoughts on how some of this stuff might have to shift?
Well, I think we have a kind of a performative nature. This is what a Christian does. This is what a Christian looks like, and we reproduce that in our kids. We're going to, go to church and we're going to study the Bible and do all those things. And man, those are great things. But let's not make them the end game. So, like I said, when my daughter was born and my wife was still in the hospital, I started journaling because I was so afraid of raising our kids within the fishbowl of being in a pastor's family. I was even wrestling with, okay, what other job could I do? Because I don't want to raise them in the church as pastors' kids. Um, so I wanted, we teach what we know, but we reproduce who we are. I use a phrase that says, a mirror works even when our eyes are closed. So I can sit with families and take about 5 minutes to realize they've already learned what you like and don't like. They've learned your politics without you espousing them. They've learned your fear, your cynicism, your insecurities. They know the triggers because they're living in proximity to you and influence. So what I tried to do is just try and make it true with me. And then I invited them into relational environments. So a couple of things. One, I defined our church by the relationships we kept. Now, I didn't raise my kids around extended biological family. So I was relying on the body of Christ to be the spiritual aunties and uncles, the spiritual cousins. We had the spiritual grandparents who were our emergency contacts that lived closer to the middle school than we were. And we, the kids understood who church was, not the geography of church. So there was church as an extended family, and some of them were in our home, and then because we'd host a lot, but others they were just in our lives. I felt like if they could be around, it's sort of like get around the fire and feel the warmth, and hopefully don't get burned. But I wanted them to see other people following in the way of Jesus, and that was as valuable to me as an expository teaching. Now, I was working at church, so I said, well, you're going to come for at least an hour, but I don't want you to feel like you have to be there for 2 hours if, just because you're my kid. Just because the church was open, I didn't want them to be there as much as I was. So there's that piece that I wanted to build around them, an incarnational revelation, if you will. Oh, this is what it looks like to rely on God's provision and people. And I could give lots of illustrations of how God used that community to reveal his character and his nature. The other piece is we tried to inhabit a living faith. So, uh, hospitality was one of my spiritual practices. And when I was doing young adults, our kids were in grade school, but man, we'd say hospitality is one of the ways we express our faith. And some of it is just making room for others. Other times we're just learning to receive from others. But in either case, we're just trying to figure out who God's prepared in advance. We're going to invite people over to our home. And once a month, I was doing young adults, and there would be 75 to 90 people. in our home, a 2,600 square foot home, and it was called Love Feast. And I was like, so, okay, Bjorn, I need you to just blow the leaves and, take care of the yard. Annika, I need you to help with the bathrooms. And then we're all going to go to Costco and shop. But we just made it a part of our kind of liturgy, if you will. And so it was very embodied. We didn't just make it our job versus, like make it our thing. It was like, no, this is kind of our way. So I felt like they were able to grow up in a laboratory rather than a lecture hall. And in particular, I'm really referring to before they get to 12. Once they come of age, then it's a different game. Once they get to teenage years, that kind of is what I tell parents is if you're still trying to lead with authority as we're a teenager, you're going to have a rough go of it. Because the big shift when they develop an opinion of their own and even the resource to get a ride from friends or whatnot, or drive themselves, we need to shift leadership from authority to influence. I can't come in hot because it'll just be heads butting and it'll be repulsive. Um, so all along the way, we tried to name the flaws of the church and including my own leadership. That's the confessional nature of how we just tried to, put ourselves out there so that they weren't expecting something that we weren't.
That's good. Any other questions as you guys are wrestling with this kind of thought and these ideas?
I can go ahead and go.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, I'm with a non-denominational church in Maryland outside of Washington, D.C. And my title on staff is Disciple Making Mobilizer. And we have a wildly important goal uh, that is to grow God's kingdom by igniting 70,000 hearts as disciple makers who will impact 7,000 homes, 700 communities, which we would define as affinity groups, not towns or cities per se,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and 70 countries. And we're a church of about 700 members.
Yeah.
So you can drill down. This can't and won't happen just in our local congregation.
Yeah.
So we have some specific goals as far as even what counts as a home or a country or a heart. And I'm just looking at our definition, if you will, of a win in a home is a household where two or more practice discipleship rhythms together. And
Mhm.
then we have some specific sub goals around praying together, following a Bible reading plan, and serving in Jesus's name. And you had mentioned earlier, maybe kind of in passing, but I'd love for you to unpack this a little bit, the distinction you make between discipleship and disciple making.
Yeah.
Because I'm noticing that we use the word discipleship there, and yet as we have both challenges in terms of tracking how this is going, but I will say anecdotally, I know we don't have a lot of traction. Um, the disciple making movements network that we're part of, we shared some of this a month or so ago, and they really suggested that we try to encourage, I'm going to say, not just these types of discipleship practices or rhythms, but to build disciple making DNA into the family rhythms. And so I don't know if that jibes with what you've been thinking about the
Mhm.
distinctions between discipleship and disciple making. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that if you wouldn't
Yeah.
mind.
Man, I love the ambition and the vision for it's really vision for movement because there's nothing you could do to orchestrate that if it's not through, and this is my primary definition of what I think it means to go through discipleship is spiritual reproduction. Um, I would say that the church has a cough. I call it a cough because if someone's choking and they're still coughing, that's a good sign. There's oxygen still flowing. When they're choking and there's nothing coming out, then you've got a problem because it's just a matter of seconds. And the reason I call it a cough is this. Most discipleship is so generically talked about, and what we typically mean is Christian education. It just means know this. And so join a Sunday school, get in a small group, talk about this pastor's sermon on Sunday. And the cough is this, the place, the kind of the choke point, if you will, is that most discipleship ends at either the end of the sermon or the last chapter. Very little discipleship, so I tried to use a more active word, disciple making, ends with the idea that you should go and do likewise, or that you're sent. There's just really little commissioning. So in churches, most of the time people sign up because small groups are discipleship, not wrong, not bad, limited because it ends in May. And we're just like, well, sign up for another small group in the fall. And nowhere in there is there an expectation that you go and do likewise. And that was Jesus's whole thing. I remember I was leading a group with it was kind of a young life group. Every Wednesday for about 2 years on a Wednesday afternoon, I had about 24 fifth grade and sixth grade boys. God bless them. And after a couple of years, I got a couple of college guys that would help me, and I said, I'll handle all the parents, and you guys do this. And it was great. But I remember driving home one week, and the guys had shared a story about what they were talking about. They'd play games, they'd have a snack, and then they'd have a little Bible study. And I looked at my son as we were driving home. I said, buddy, you know that story today. And I just went through the whole story. It was, one of the parables. I said, I care more about your ability to teach that to someone else. One day you might lead your own small group like this, and there's going to be some other middle school boys. And this is what was said to me 30 years ago by the guy who discipled me. He's a man by the name of Tim Elmore. He said, David, I don't really want to teach you anything new. I just want to make sure you know how to give it away. And I'm like, that that doesn't sound like classroom. So we need to like reintroduce disciple making as I need to be entrusted. How do I give this away? Now, I'll also add to that piece. Uh, the one thing parents know is coming is that one day these kids are going to be out on their own. They're either going to go to college, they're going to move out, or they should. If they don't, you haven't done a good enough job. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like they should adult, even though that grieves me. Um, at the end of the book, I talk about because the last chapter isn't a conclusion. I call it commissioning. But I was like, every time we gain something, we also lose something, which is very counterintuitive for every Westerner. We think to grow is to accumulate, get bigger, more of. But like when my son got his driver's license, I was liberated from being his personal Uber, except there was a relational drift. We didn't think out loud together as much. We didn't process the day as much. We didn't just joke because he was driving on his own. Oh. And then when he went away to college, which was awesome, and he was adulting and, just killing it in college, I remember turning off the lights and locking the front door and go, that's right, he's not coming home again tonight. And this is what parents actually realize sooner than churches is I've got to get them ready spiritually and otherwise, because one day they're going to have to own their faith and live it out on their own. Churches live under the misguided notion that we all get to grow old together. And so there's very little sending. And so I'm saying the clock's ticking. And my wife used to she stopped talking about it. I was like, we've got 7 years left before, Annika's gone. She's like, I don't want to. I was like, I love him too, but the clock's ticking. And so there was some specific things in terms of the orientation of their heart that they would, quote, own their faith. And I would simply define that as outside of pastoral instruction or parental encouragement, they would choose to walk with Jesus even if we fell away or weren't in their life.
It's good.
So that was the relational nature that I was really camped out on to just incarnate it. Yeah, Alan.
Well, I was gonna, Alex, you can speak to this too if you want, but Alex put a question here in the chat. I'll just read it out. It says, "Will you speak more about how parents stoke their children's desire? You suggested that we share from our own experience why we do what we do. I could see how they might see how generosity, for example, brings you joy and experiment with it themselves. How does this also turn them towards appreciating God's generosity and wanting to be closer with Him?"
Yeah. Our kids grew up in an affluent community and we were the minority. We did not make as much. We had moved from California to Austin, Texas, and I wasn't a good businessman. I just lived in a very expensive part, and it was the first time in our life that we had equity in a home. So we bought this house. It's kind of the house that I've been fixing up for 20 years in a nicer neighborhood. Anyway, but they would constantly, especially around fourth grade, they really started noticing, oh, there's a difference here. And and what we just tried to instill is not what we didn't have or what others had, but what we did have. And so we wanted to, build a life together. And that life together meant if we do our own yard work and we do some of our own home improvement, and if we, all the things like wash our own cars, we can have the money to be able to do the fun things like, oh, we get to do this trip or we get to go out to the movies and eat out and do all the things. It was just orient them about, hey, we're working with finite resources here. But then I started this little phrase, hey, who's got it better than us? Because people have more, but we've got each other in Christ. And so it was an awareness that it's all his. And look at our abundance, friendship, love, community, all the things. So we were just trying to instill in them an awareness of that. And part of that was, okay, let's take them around people who do have less, so that they could see abundance, even if it was relative abundance. I'm not sure I totally answered that question, but I talked at it.
Yeah.
Is there more there?
Yeah, I'm just I think what I'm taking away from that is that you're helping them draw the correlations between these things. So for example, you as a family are talking about being generous and like in my case, maybe my son like wants to be generous to this person. Like we've been doing this practice. He's been seeing that that's a family value of ours.
Yeah.
He like wants to give, something that's important to him to someone else. Uh, this brings, of course, much joy to me, observing him wanting to do this of his own accord. Um, but then but then I want to bring also him into an awareness that our generosity is free because of we are also provided for by the Father. Like
Yeah.
we don't have to be afraid that if I give this away, I will not have,
Yeah.
what I need. And so, but I think what you're saying is like it's largely about the explanation of like helping them complete that circle of okay, this is good, but this where is the source, I suppose,
Yeah.
of
Alex, what you're saying is John 15, he's the vine, I'm the branch. There is something that it all comes from him. I can act like, yeah, well, I worked hard in my education, or I learned a craft along the way to be able to fix stuff, or uh, at the end of the day, it's all from him, which means that all that I have and all that I am is really just a sacred trust. And so the other piece of that is um, I just wanted them to understand the why. Why does dad keep offering our home out to people? Why does dad keep partnering? Like, so we did a lot of work with refugees and being in their apartments, and I I wanted to bring them along to see people, because I don't believe love your neighbor was necessarily a proximity statement, especially if we read Jeremiah 29, seek the peace and the prosperity of the city in which you live. We noticed that the people on my block didn't need my groceries. They didn't need shelter or my clothes. But there were people in our city that did. And so there was a more of a kingdom orientation there. And so we organized a yearly thing around our kind of missional community called Have to Share One. And when all these good church folk leave Jerusalem to go out to John the Baptist, he greets them. Oh, you're a bunch of snakes. Hey, what did we do? Well, you think you're good because you're all sons of Abraham, but there's needs among you, and y'all don't even care. And then he's like, the axe is at the root. I'm like, well, what do we do? And he goes, well, if you got two, share one. So we took it literally. And so we were going door to door with friends that we had made in the Burmese. Could you introduce us to some of the people? And we would just simply go, hey, you know, identify ourselves, but we're so glad you're here. How long have you been here? Have you been able to find work? And is there anything we can pray for? And then we would share some of our belongings with them. And so our kids were, in some of those very odd smelling apartments and but we're trying to illustrate the disparity, and we wanted to say they are as loved as we are, and coming to America was Plan B. They had to leave their home, so kind of an effort to stand in solidarity without lecturing them on how good they have it. Again, we were just trying to put them in places where God could reveal God's heart for the world. And oh, by the way, Alex, I always like to say. When a child is really excited about giving away mom and dad's money, it's a good thing, but you're like, okay, we can't just try this. If there's someone that he wants to pass out something to, say at a red light with a sign, pull over and learn the guy's name and learn the guy's story. Or if he needs a meal, invite him, like bring the meal and have actual conversation, not just pass it out your window, because the relationship will be more longer lasting than the handout.
Mhm.
Uh, and so we did this thing where with our community, we called it New Normal, but it would be for Lent. And I would just encourage families to fast normal, ordinary expenditures. Like, hey, if you're all going out for pizza, just drink water and just keep a running tally of the sodas, or drink homebrew coffee or office coffee. Don't stop at the coffee shop, but in our little community of less than 100, we cobbled together over those, 3 or 4 weeks, $1,500. And then Easter Sunday, we wanted to live into the resurrection by bringing new life to others. And so we just passed out $50 bills and grocery gift cards. And I was like, y'all, I'm just buying your story. You're not trying to change a life, but we're just trying to bring a little encouragement and new life to others. And I just want to hear about who you met along the way. And that's where like moms were shopping on the other side of town at different grocery stores because people were using SNAP, or SNAP is food stamps, or you just different initiatives where people were actually bringing their kids into a unique environment.
Well, one of the things I got excited about when you were doing this webinar, David, was the kind of the next steps, the follow up. And so you've launched this book, Homegrown Disciples. So I put the link in the chat back up there. You guys can check that out. I'll also put in the follow up email. But one of the things you're going to do afterwards is kind of like a journey through this. So could you kind of unpack that a little bit, and then I'll put some more information in the chat as you do that.
Well, I appreciate you mentioning that, Alan. The idea that I wanted to do, so the book released in May, and I've been able to have some neat conversations. I've done some workshopping of it. Parents have the greatest amount of need with seemingly the least amount of bandwidth. And so I just, for this first year, wanted to do something unique, and that is um, on the first Wednesday of each month, I'm going to be hosting a night. Um, and I call it Equip, Encouraging Qualities Undeveloped in Parents. It's about an hour-ish, hour and 15 minutes uh, to uh, um, for two things. If families are just going through it, I wanted to be able to interact with them and answer questions about a rhythm. I want them to read the stuff because it's so practical. Hey, there's this thing that I call finding your rhythm, so that parents are actually having some kind of spiritual interaction to kind of not just get by, but keep growing um, in new and different ways. And then I create family, what I call DIY opportunities. But I'm just trying to give you fresh language to reflect the heart of God and share it with your kids. So the other piece is like there's been some families that say, we're part of a small group or we have this missional community, and it really lends itself to being in community. And if that community wanted to make one of their meetings, hey, join me. I'm going to be going through this stuff together as well. So that's kind of half the time. The other half of the time is I just spent 3 years doing doctoral research on cultural intelligence, cultural shifts. You realize every parent today is parenting in a world that they did not grow up in. Because of the digital revolution, it's created whole new neural pathways collectively. And so, what I want to do is walk parents through developmental transitions. I want to talk about cultural shifts. We live in a world that sees truth as completely relative. Uh, and I still think absolute truth exists. And I want to share ways that I think we can instill that with our kids. So it's part debrief on, hey, how is a rhythm a month going for you? The other part is, how can I help you grow and get better and figure this thing out, navigating it along the way? So from October until May, I'm going to be doing Equip on the first Wednesday of every month. And Alan said, put the um, the link. It's an Eventbrite link, and I was just going to meet with folks along the way.
Yeah, so that's in there. I'll send that in the follow-up email as well, so you guys can have that. And as far as next steps go, I would highly recommend that. I'd recommend connecting with Dave, having other parents. If you're part of a church leadership, having other parents get in on that. I think that'd be great. And then for us, for Forge, I'm going to put this in there. We're doing our next cohort. It's going to be a 4-week cohort. It's actually on discipleship. It's Discipleship 101. Our friends Monica and Jeremy Chambers were part of the Forge tribe. They're going to host that. If you go to forgeteachable.com, you should see it on there. You can sign up there. And then I'm just going to put this in there. If there's anything that we could do for you guys, forgeamerica.com. We'd love to connect with you in any way. So, David, just really appreciate the time, appreciate all the effort and all the research and everything that you've put into this book and being vulnerable and sharing it. Just really appreciate it, man.
Oh, well, I mean, you guys and your hospitality and willing to invite me into this. I am so grateful, and I'm such a fan of Forge and what you're doing um, as a scattered movement. Is it just want to add fuel to the fire?
Awesome, thank you. Well, let me pray, and then we can call it a night or an evening if you're in Alaska, I guess, for Joe. Yeah. Father God, I thank you for this time. I thank you for the opportunity to be able to connect like this in all these different states and places, to be able to think through and wrestle with how we disciple our kids. God, I thank you for David. And I thank you for the heart and the vulnerability and the teaching that you've given him. God, I pray that this time has been beneficial and it inspires us as leaders and as parents as we look to and invest in the next generation. So, God, thank you. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Appreciate you guys. If you have any questions, again, I put David's website on there and he says you're more than welcome to connect with him on Instagram. He does it for the gram. So that's
Yeah.
also in there. Just David Sunday with an E, not an AY, right?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Not like the day or
So,
the ice cream, but I would love to interact with you along the way.
yes. Yeah. So, guys, thank you for staying up late or somewhat late if you're in Alaska. So appreciate it, guys.
Bless you. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.